Jack Turner had always been the kind of man who believed that life changed when a person took a chance. Even if that chance looked strange or unexpected. He had spent most of his 28 years riding across the deserts of Arizona, working on different ranches, fixing fences, herding cattle, and doing whatever work came his way. But deep down, he carried a quiet dream to own a small piece of land he could finally call his own. He wasn't looking for anything big or fancy. Just a place where he could build a simple home, raise a few horses, and watch the sun rise and set across a land that belonged to him. That dream seemed impossible for a cowboy who lived from paycheck to paycheck, but Jack never allowed himself to lose hope. Every time he rode through open fields or stood beneath a wide night sky full of stars, he felt that someday the land would speak to him, and he would know where he was meant to settle. One warm afternoon, while passing through a dusty town on the edge of the desert, his life took a turn he never could have imagined. The town was small, with just a few stores, a feed shop, a wooden water tower, and a main road covered in sand blown in by the wind. Jack stopped to water his horse and rest for a moment. As he stood near the hitching post, he overheard two old men talking outside the general store. They were speaking about a ranch being sold for only $50. Jack almost didn't believe his ears. $50 wasn't just cheap, it was unbelievable. Even a small, broken-down shack usually cost more than that. Curious, he walked toward the men and politely asked them about it. The older of the two men, with silver hair and a gentle voice, looked Jack over and then explained. According to him, the ranch had belonged to an old prospector who had passed away. No one wanted the property because it was far out in the desert, isolated from town life. The land was said to be dry and neglected. Some even whispered that strange things had happened there, though no one could explain exactly what. Most people simply avoided it because it was too far and too quiet. There were easier places to live. Jack listened carefully, feeling a small spark of interest in his chest. A lonely ranch in the middle of nowhere didn't scare him. In fact, it sounded peaceful, exactly the kind of place where a man could build a fresh start. He asked where he could find the seller, and within an hour, he was sitting in front of a thin, tired-looking man who held the property deed. The seller repeated the same warnings. The land was empty, the buildings old, and the road to reach the ranch was rough. But Jack wasn't worried. He saw possibility where others saw problems. With only a few words exchanged, he placed $50 on the table. The seller blinked in surprise, as if he hadn't expected anyone to actually take the ranch. But he signed the paper quickly and handed Jack the key to the old house. Jack held that key in his hand for a long moment after the deal. It felt strangely heavy, like it carried not just metal but stories, secrets, maybe even fate. He thanked the man, tied his bedroll to the saddle, bought a small bag of supplies, and headed out of town before the sun fell too low. As Jack rode toward his new land, he felt excitement building inside him. The road stretched long and straight across the desert, glowing under the afternoon light. The sky above him was clear and bright, with only a few thin clouds drifting lazily. His horse's steady footsteps blended with the quiet air, creating a rhythm that made his thoughts drift. He wondered what the ranch looked like, what condition the house might be in, and whether the rumors of odd things happening had any truth to them. Jack wasn't superstitious, but he respected the desert. He knew that empty places sometimes held stories of their own. The journey took several hours, and by the time he reached the area described on the map, the sun was dipping toward the horizon. The ranch sat at the base of low, rugged hills. From a distance, Jack could see the outline of a small wooden house, a barn, a corral, and a windmill that leaned slightly to one side, as if tired of standing through the years. The land around it was quiet, but not the kind of quiet that felt dead. It felt watchful, almost alert. As Jack approached the gate, he noticed something unusual. The ground near the entrance had footprints, fresh ones. Not from a horse, not from cattle, but from people. He paused and leaned down to look closer. The footprints were light but clear in the dust, and they weren't more than a day old. That surprised him. He had expected old, dry tracks left by long-gone travelers. But these prints were recent, and there were several of them. Jack stood up and looked around. The desert wind blew softly, carrying the smell of dry earth and wild sage, but nothing moved. Still, he felt the quiet settle differently on his shoulders. Almost as though unseen eyes were following him, he opened the gate slowly and guided his horse inside. The ranch house looked worn but not damaged. The windows were intact, the wooden steps sturdy, and the door, though weathered, seemed recently used. There were faint signs of life everywhere: ashes in a fire pit, a bucket half filled with water, and the soft imprint of someone having sat on the porch steps. Jack tried to push away the uneasy feeling crawling around in the back of his mind. Maybe travelers had stopped by. Maybe someone had been using the property without knowing it belonged to anyone. People sometimes camped on abandoned land. That wasn't unusual. Still, he couldn't shake the sense that the ranch wasn't as empty as everyone believed. He led his horse to the corral and set his supplies near the house. As the last light of the day faded, he heard a faint sound coming from the barn, a soft, quick movement, like someone stepping lightly on dry ground. He turned his head sharply, but the doorway was dark, and he saw nothing. He thought about checking the barn right away, but it was getting dark fast, and he didn't want to stumble inside without a lamp. Instead, he locked the barn door from the outside, placed his gear in the house, and sat on the porch to think. The night settled around him quietly. The stars appeared, thousands of them shining across the deep sky. Jack loved nights like this, peaceful and open. But tonight felt different. Every few minutes he found himself glancing toward the barn, wondering who or what might be inside. He wasn't scared, just alert. The desert had taught him to trust his instincts, and right now his instincts were whispering that something unexpected was waiting for him. But Jack Turner wasn't a man who ran from mystery. He had bought this land with hope in his heart, and whatever its story was, he was ready to face it. He didn't know yet that the simple $50 ranch he had purchased would change his life in ways he could never imagine. He didn't know that behind those quiet barn doors, 3 lives were hidden lives that would soon cross with his in the most surprising way. For now, under the soft desert night, he simply breathed deep, listened to the wind, and waited for morning, unaware of the shock that awaited him at sunrise. Jack woke up early the next morning. The desert sky was still pale, and the first soft colors of dawn were just beginning to rise over the distant hills. For a moment, he simply sat up on his bedroll, listening to the quiet. The house was still, the air cool, and everything around him seemed calm. But then he remembered the faint sound he had heard near the barn the night before, and the memory brought back that unsettled feeling. He stepped outside, stretching his arms as the cool wind brushed past him. The land looked peaceful in the morning light, almost gentle. But Jack's eyes kept drifting toward the barn. It stood there, silent and still, yet something about it felt alive, as if someone had walked through it only moments ago. He rubbed his horse's neck and checked the corral fence. Everything seemed normal. But the thought kept tugging at him, the footprints he had seen, the bucket of water already half full, the ashes in the fire pit. All of those signs pointed to recent activity. Someone had been here. Maybe they still were. Jack wasn't afraid, just curious. But he also knew better than to move too fast. The desert taught patience, so instead of heading straight to the barn, he walked around the property, taking in every detail he had missed the night before. The ranch was more alive than anyone in town had described. The soil near the house looked recently disturbed, as if someone had planted or dug something. A small trail of footprints led behind the barn toward the hills. They were faint but fresh. Jack crouched down and touched the dust with his fingers. The impressions were soft, meaning they had been made within the last day. He followed the tracks for a few steps but stopped when they disappeared into the rocky ground. Whoever had walked there knew how to move quietly. Jack stood up and scanned the horizon. The land stretched wide and open, the hills gentle and golden in the rising sun. Everything looked normal. No shadows moving, no figures coming or going, but the feeling of being watched lingered around him like warm air. He walked back toward the house, trying to shake off the uneasiness. He had bought the ranch fair and square. It belonged to him now. If someone had been using it because it was empty before, he couldn't blame them. The desert was a hard place, and sometimes people needed shelter. Maybe travelers had stopped for a night. Maybe a small family had used the barn. But he needed to know the truth, and the only way to find it was to investigate calmly. After a simple breakfast of dried fruit and biscuits, Jack finally approached the barn. The morning light pushed inside through the cracks between the wooden boards, creating thin lines of gold across the ground. The barn door still carried the marks of being opened recently, not old scratches, but fresh smudges of dust rubbed away by hands. Jack placed his hand on the door and took a slow breath. Then he pushed it open. The barn smelled of old hay, leather, and faint smoke. Everything inside looked quiet. Saddles hung on their racks. Tools leaned against the wall. A few empty crates lay neatly stacked in a corner. Nothing seemed out of place yet at the same time. Everything felt watched over and recently touched. Jack stepped inside, careful not to make too much noise. He looked around for tracks on the floor. Sure enough, there were footprints light. Careful steps that moved around the barn, near the crates, near the back wall, and then disappeared behind a large stack of hay. He followed them slowly. Suddenly, he heard a soft sound, not loud, not threatening, but clear. A quiet shift of weight. Someone was there. He froze, keeping his voice calm and steady. "Hello?" he called softly. "If someone's in here, I'm not looking for trouble. Just trying to understand who's been using my place." He waited, breathing quietly, listening closely. At first, there was nothing. Then, a faint whisper of movement. Jack took another step toward the haystack. Behind it, he found something surprising: a blanket carefully folded, a small clay pot, and what looked like the remains of a small meal. Someone had stayed here recently. Someone had tried to keep it hidden. Jack knelt down, picking up the blanket gently. It was woven in a traditional pattern, something he recognized from the local tribes. He placed it back exactly as he found it, not wanting to disturb anything. That confirmed it. Whoever was here wasn't a random traveler, and they weren't here by accident. He quietly backed away, leaving the items untouched. He didn't want to corner anyone or frighten them. People hid only when they felt unsafe. And Jack wasn't the kind of man who wanted to make anyone feel that way. He stepped outside the barn and looked around the ranch again. The sun was higher now, casting long shadows from the windmill and the house. The air felt warmer, and the quiet stretched far across the land. But Jack knew he wasn't alone. He could feel it in a way he couldn't explain: a sense of presence, like someone was just out of sight, watching his reactions, waiting to see what kind of man he was. Instead of searching further, Jack chose to work. He believed that sometimes people revealed themselves when they felt safe enough. So he grabbed a bucket, walked to the well, and began repairing the rope and handle. He fixed a loose board on the porch, cleaned out the old trough, and swept the front steps. All the while, he felt eyes on him, though he never saw anyone. Hours passed, and the warm afternoon settled in. Jack continued working, moving slowly and peacefully, giving whoever was hiding time to decide what to do. By late afternoon, the quietness changed again. The wind shifted slightly, carrying a soft, almost hesitant sound: footsteps on the dirt path behind the barn. Jack didn't turn around right away. He didn't want to startle whoever it was. Instead, he kept working, hammering a loose nail into the porch rail. Only after a minute did he look up casually, as if checking the sky. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw movement, a small figure stepping behind the barn. Then another. And finally, a third. The shapes were quick and cautious, making no noise. Jack's heart beat a little faster. Whoever was there wasn't just one person, there were three. He set his tools down carefully and took a slow seat on the porch steps, giving the hidden figures the chance to observe him without pressure. He didn't call out. He didn't chase. He waited. The sun dipped lower, painting the sky with gold and orange. Shadows grew long across the ranch. Jack remained still, patient, thoughtful. He didn't know that behind the old barn wall, 3 young Apache women were whispering softly, watching his every move, wondering what kind of man had arrived at the land they had secretly been calling home. Jack Turner only knew one thing for sure: the ranch was not empty, and whatever story lay behind those cautious footsteps was about to reveal itself very soon. Jack woke before the sun again, but this time the quiet outside felt different. The ranch no longer felt like an empty place. It felt aware, almost awake, as if the land itself knew something important was about to happen. The wind moved gently through the dry grass, and the sky slowly shifted from deep blue to soft pink. Jack took a deep breath, feeling both calm and alert. He stepped onto the porch and scanned the area with thoughtful eyes. The barn stood in its usual place, silent but not lifeless. Jack could sense the presence of the 3 quiet figures he had seen the day before. He couldn't explain how he knew they had been quick, careful, and hidden, but he felt it strongly. Whoever they were still here. Jack didn't want to force anything. Instead, he moved through his morning as naturally as possible. He checked his horse, fixed another loose board on the fence, and cleaned up the area around the well. Each movement was slow and steady, showing he meant no harm. While he worked, the sky brightened, and the sun finally rose above the hills. Jack wiped his forehead and took a moment to rest. He sipped water from his canteen and let his eyes drift toward the barn. The door was slightly open only by an inch. But it hadn't been like that yesterday. Someone was inside. This time, Jack didn't hesitate. He stood, dusted off his hands, and walked toward the barn with quiet steps. He didn't rush. He didn't want anyone to feel threatened. He paused just outside the doorway, listening. For a second, everything was still. Then he heard a soft sound, almost like a whisper or a breath being held too long. Jack pushed the barn door open gently. Sunlight streamed inside, cutting across the dusty air. The familiar smell of hay and old wood filled his nose. He stepped in slowly, letting his eyes adjust to the dim light. At first, nothing seemed different from the day before. The tools were in place. The hay was stacked. The saddles hung in their usual spots. But then, in the far corner, he noticed a faint movement, small, careful, and frightened. Jack stopped. Standing there, partly hidden by the shadows, were 3 young Apache women. They looked startled, their eyes wide and alert, ready to run if they needed to. They wore simple clothing suited for desert life, and each one stood close to the other for comfort and protection. Jack's breath caught with surprise. But he quickly softened his expression, not wanting to alarm them more than they already were. One of the women, perhaps the oldest, stepped slightly forward, though her shoulders remained tense. Her dark eyes watched Jack closely, trying to judge his intentions. The other 2 stayed behind her, clutching their blankets as if prepared to flee at any sudden movement. Jack slowly raised his hands, not high, just enough to show he was harmless. "It's all right," he said gently. "I'm not here to hurt anyone." His voice echoed softly in the barn, warm and steady. For a moment, the women didn't move. They simply studied him, their bodies stiff with caution. Jack didn't blame them. If they had been hiding here, they must have had a reason. People didn't choose to live in an old barn unless they were looking for safety. The oldest woman spoke first. Her English was limited, but her meaning was clear. "We stay here," she said softly. "We know trouble." Jack nodded, reassuring them with a kind smile. "I know," he replied. "I saw signs someone was here. I just didn't know who." The second woman stepped forward just a little, enough for Jack to see her face in the sunlight. She looked younger and more frightened than the first. Her voice was even quieter. "We only hide," she whispered. Jack felt a weight in his chest, not fear, but compassion. He could see that their situation was delicate. These women had been living quietly, trying not to be found. They hadn't stolen anything. They hadn't damaged the ranch. They had simply used the space for shelter and stayed invisible to avoid trouble. Jack took a slow breath and spoke again, keeping his tone calm. "This land, it's mine now. I bought it last week," he explained gently. But I didn't come here to force anyone out. I just want to understand. The three women exchanged glances. They seemed unsure of what to say or do. The eldest finally tried to explain, though her words were broken and slow. "Bad place we leave," she said. "Come here. Quiet here. Safe." Jack listened carefully. He didn't interrupt. He didn't push for details. He understood that whatever they had escaped from wasn't something they wanted to revisit. The women remained tense, watching him carefully, as if waiting for him to change his mind or show anger. Jack simply nodded and lowered himself to sit on a small wooden crate nearby. He wanted them to see he wasn't a threat. "You can stay," he said softly. "At least until we talk more. I won't make you leave." The women stared at him with surprise. The youngest of the three blinked as if she hadn't expected kindness. The middle woman slowly released the grip on her blanket, her shoulders loosening a little. Jack continued speaking, keeping his words slow and simple. "My name is Jack," he said, tapping his chest lightly. "Jack Turner." The eldest woman hesitated, then touched her chest as well. "Nayeli," she said. She pointed to the second woman. "Sani." Then to the youngest. "Luyu." Jack repeated their names carefully, making sure he said them correctly. A soft expression flickered over their faces, something between relief and trust beginning to form. After a moment, Jack stood up but didn't step any closer. "Are you hungry?" he asked. Nayeli nodded slowly. Sani and Luyu looked unsure, but they didn't object. Jack smiled gently and gestured toward the house. "I'll bring food here," he said. "You don't have to come out yet." He walked out of the barn without turning his back too quickly. He wanted them to feel respected. Once outside, he exhaled deeply. The encounter had been intense, but he felt oddly peaceful. The mystery he'd been sensing finally had faces and names. He gathered simple food, bread, dried fruit, and some fresh water and carried it back to the barn. When he returned, the women were still in the same corner, but looked slightly more relaxed. Jack placed the food on a clean cloth and stepped back, giving them space. "Please," he said softly. The women moved carefully, gratefully accepting the food. There was no rush, no desperation, only quiet appreciation. As they ate, Jack felt something shift inside him. The ranch no longer felt like just a piece of land. It felt like a place with a story. A place where lives had crossed for a reason. He watched them gently, not staring or intruding. They looked tired but strong, frightened but brave. He knew they must have gone through something difficult to end up hiding in an old barn, and he felt a quiet responsibility forming in his heart. After a while, Nayeli looked at him and spoke again, her voice slightly stronger. "We stay little time," she said. Jack shook his head softly. "You don't have to rush," he replied. "Stay as long as you need, until you feel safe." The barn fell silent again, but it was a different kind of silence, warmer, less fearful. Jack stood and gently closed the barn door behind him as he left. He walked back toward the house, feeling the sun warm his back. The day had started with mystery and tension, but it was ending with understanding and the beginning of an unexpected connection. He didn't yet know that the decision he made today would change the entire future of the ranch. But as he looked around at the wide-open land, he felt certain of one thing. The $50 deal had brought more into his life than he ever imagined, and the story was only just beginning. For the next few days, the ranch seemed to settle into a quiet rhythm. Jack woke up early, as he always did, and went about repairing small parts of the place, fixing fences, clearing brush, and patching cracks in the house walls. Each morning, he noticed small signs that the three Apache women were still living in the barn. Footprints in the dust, ashes from a small fire they used for warmth, and the faint sound of quiet voices late at night. They did not come out much, but Jack respected their distance. He didn't hurry them or try to force conversation. Instead, he worked peacefully, hoping they would see through his actions that he meant no harm. Slowly, a gentle trust began to grow between them, like a shy plant rising after a long winter. On the fourth morning, something unexpected happened. Jack was sweeping the porch when he heard soft footsteps approaching from behind. He turned and saw Nayeli, the oldest of the three women, standing near the edge of the yard. Her posture was stiff, but her expression was calmer than before. Jack offered a friendly nod. "Good morning." Nayeli hesitated, then stepped forward. She held a small woven pouch in her hands. With slow, careful movements, she handed it to Jack. Inside were a few smooth stones, each etched with tiny designs. "For you," she said softly. Jack looked at the stones with appreciation. "They're beautiful. Thank you." Nayeli gave a small nod and glanced around the ranch. "We want help," she said. "We work too." Jack understood what she meant. She and the other women didn't want to depend on his kindness without giving something in return. They wanted to contribute, to show respect for the land. And for Jack. "You don't have to," Jack said gently. "But if you want to, I won't stop you." Nayeli's shoulders relaxed at his words. "We help," she repeated. Then she walked back toward the barn, her steps more confident than before. Later that day, Sani and Luyu joined her in small chores, gathering firewood, carrying water, and sweeping the barn. They moved with quiet determination and natural skill, as if they had spent their whole lives working with the land. Jack admired how gracefully they worked together without speaking much. They didn't waste energy or hurry. They simply understood the desert and moved with it instead of against it. By the end of the week, the ranch looked more alive than it ever had. The place seemed warmer, as if the presence of the three women brought a new kind of strength to the land. One afternoon, while Jack repaired a broken wheel on an old wagon, Luyu approached him timidly. She was the youngest, with wide eyes that always carried a hint of shyness. She held a small clay bowl in her hands, filled with a mixture of herbs. "Drink," she said gently, pushing the bowl toward him. Jack looked surprised. "For what?" She smiled softly. "For tired," she answered. "Good for body." Jack accepted the bowl gratefully and drank. The taste was earthy but soothing, and within minutes, he felt his muscles relax. Luyu giggled quietly at his surprised expression, then hurried back to the barn, her shy smile lingering before she disappeared through the door. Moments like that became more common. Sani showed him how to find water by reading the signs of certain plants. Nayeli explained how to watch the sky, to understand weather changes. Luyu shared simple remedies made from desert herbs. Jack realized he had more to learn than he ever expected. These women knew the land better than anyone he had ever met. Their knowledge wasn't written in books or taught in classrooms. It was passed down from generations who lived close to the earth, who respected it deeply. One evening, after a long day of work, Jack sat on the porch watching the sun set behind the hills. The sky glowed with warm colors, orange, pink, and gold blending into each other. As he watched, Nayeli walked over and sat on the bottom step, keeping a respectful distance but no longer hiding. For a while, they watched the sky in silence. Then Nayeli spoke. "You good man," she said simply. "Not like others." Jack nodded, though he didn't know exactly what she meant. "I just want peace here," he replied. "This land is quiet. I like it that way." Nayeli looked out at the desert, her expression thoughtful. "We come from place not quiet," she said. "Too many problems. We try to stay safe." Jack didn't ask what those problems were. He knew she would tell him only when she felt comfortable. Instead, he said, "You're safe here." Nayeli turned and gave him a small, grateful smile. It was the first time she had smiled openly since he met her. The days continued like this, each one bringing a bit more understanding between them. They didn't talk much, but when they did, the conversations were simple, honest, and full of quiet respect. The women learned to trust Jack, and Jack learned to trust them in return. One afternoon, Jack found Sani repairing a broken section of the corral fence with skillful precision. He walked over, impressed. "You fixed that better than I ever could," he said with a grin. Sani looked up, her cheeks warming with a quiet pride. "My father teach," she replied. Long time ago, Jack felt a small tug in his heart at the mention of her father. He sensed that the three women had left more behind than just a home. They had left memories, family, and safety. But he also sensed that being on the ranch was helping them regain some of that comfort. Later that day, while gathering firewood, Luyu showed Jack how to spot certain plants that kept snakes away. "Good for around house," she said. "Keep safe." Jack knelt beside her as she pointed out the plant's shape and smell. Her explanation was simple, but the care behind it was clear. Luyu wasn't just teaching him something useful, she was helping protect the ranch, the place they were slowly beginning to see as peaceful. As the week turned into 2, the energy on the ranch changed even more. The barn no longer felt like a hiding place. The women came out in the mornings to help with chores. They cooked simple meals and shared them with Jack. They laughed softly among themselves, and sometimes Jack found himself smiling without even realizing it. These moments weren't loud or dramatic. They were warm, gentle, and full of life. One evening, when the wind carried a cooler breeze, Jack sat with the women near a small fire. They shared stories, not full stories, but pieces of memories. Sani spoke of learning to ride horses when she was young. Luyu talked about her first attempt at making clay pots. Nayeli told him about the elders she had admired growing up. Jack shared his own stories too, how he dreamed of owning land, how he traveled from job to job, how he always believed the desert had a place for him. As the fire crackled softly, Jack felt a realization settle in his mind. The ranch was no longer just his land. It was becoming a place of healing for all 4 of them. He looked around at the quiet hills, the glowing sky, the gentle firelight, and the 3 women sitting beside him. Something inside him settled a feeling that everything happening here was shaping a new beginning. The $50 ranch was worth more than he ever imagined. Not because of the land itself, but because of the unexpected bond forming among people who had once been strangers. Jack didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, he felt he wasn't alone. The ranch wasn't just a place to live, it was becoming a place of connection, understanding, and quiet friendship. And deep in his heart, he sensed that this chapter of the story was only the beginning of something far more meaningful. The morning sun rose slowly over the ranch, lighting up the wooden fences, the tall grass, and the small cabins that now felt like home to everyone living there. Clay stepped outside with a deep breath, feeling the calm air settle around him. It had been many months since the surprising day he bought this land for $50 and found the 3 Apache women waiting here. So much had changed since then that sometimes he wondered if he was living a different life altogether. The ranch, once lonely and empty, had become a place full of movement, energy, and warm voices. The 3 sisters, Lena, Sani, and Mira, had grown comfortable on the land. They walked freely now, laughed openly, and worked alongside Clay like they had always belonged here. Their horses grazed near the barn. Their handmade baskets decorated the porch, and their quiet songs blended with the wind that moved through the grass. Clay often thought about how strange it was that life could change so quickly. He had bought the ranch hoping to escape his troubles, but instead he had found new responsibilities, new relationships, and a deeper understanding of trust. The women had not only accepted him as part of their world but had helped him find purpose. Each day taught him something new about patience, understanding, and respect for the paths others walked. On this particular morning, Clay saw the 3 sisters sitting near the corral, talking softly while weaving patterns with colorful threads. Their hands moved with calm confidence as the designs slowly took shape. He walked toward them with a smile, knowing they would sense his presence even before he reached them. Lena looked up first. She was the eldest, steady and thoughtful. Her eyes always saw more than she said. "You wake early today," she said with a gentle nod. Clay chuckled. "Couldn't sleep. Too much on my mind." Mira, the youngest, laughed lightly. "Your mind is always full of something. Maybe the sunrise woke you." She pointed toward the horizon, where orange light touched the mountains far away. Sani looked at him quietly. She never spoke as much as her sisters, but her words always carried meaning. "The land is peaceful today," she said. "Maybe it is telling you something." Clay sat down with them, watching the patterns in their weaving. "Maybe it is," he said softly. "Maybe it's telling me it's time to think about the future." The three sisters paused in their work. They exchanged looks, curious, not worried. Lena leaned slightly closer. "And what future are you thinking about?" Clay hesitated. He had been turning these thoughts over for a long time, unsure how to express them. He didn't want to sound uncertain, but he also didn't want to assume anything. Finally, he took a slow breath and said, "I think we've all built something together here. Something strong, something that feels like a family." The sisters listened silently, their expressions soft and open. "I know we came together in a strange way," Clay continued, "but I'm proud of what we've made. And I want to keep building it. Not just as a ranch, but as a home. For all of us." Lena's eyes warmed, though she didn't say anything just yet. Sani placed her weaving aside. "We have felt the same," she said. "This place has become home to us too. We see the work you do, the kindness you show, and the respect you give. These things matter." Mira nodded eagerly. "We stay because we want to, not because we must. That is important." Clay felt something loosen in his chest, like tension melting away. It meant more than he could say to hear that they chose to be here. There was a peaceful silence for a moment before Lena spoke. "If you speak of the future," she said softly, "then we should speak clearly. You want this life to continue, yes? You want us to remain here with you?" "Yes," Clay said immediately. "I do." Lena smiled in a calm, quiet way. "Then you already have your answer. We stay. Not just for the ranch, but because you have become part of our lives. We trust you." That is no small thing. The moment felt full of understanding, full of connection, and full of the promise of what lay ahead. Clay had never imagined he would hear such words. And for a moment, he had no reply. He only nodded, grateful beyond measure. Later that afternoon, the four of them gathered near the barn to continue repairing a fence that had been weakened by winter winds. They worked side by side, laughing at small mistakes, sharing stories, and moving in easy rhythm. Their teamwork had become a natural part of daily life. At one point, as Mira hammered a nail into place, she said, "You know, when we first met you, we didn't know what kind of man you were. It was..." Clay laughed. "You and me both. But now," she continued brightly, "I think it was good that life surprised us." Sani added quietly, "Sometimes surprises lead to better paths." Lena nodded. "And sometimes strangers become family." The words settled over Clay like a warm blanket. He felt something shift inside him, something deep and steady. He realized that the ranch was no longer just a place where he lived. It had become a place where he belonged. As the day drew to a close, they sat around a small fire near the porch. The flames flickered softly, casting warm light over their faces. The stars appeared one by one in the sky above, bright and calm against the darkness. Clay looked at the three sisters, each unique in her way, each strong, wise, and kind. They had welcomed him into their world, taught him about their traditions, and helped him grow. And he, in return, had offered them a safe place, steady support, and honest care. It wasn't a story of luck or perfect moments. It was a story of patience, trust, and the gentle work of understanding one another. As the fire crackled softly, Lena leaned back and said, "Do you remember the day you first arrived?" Clay laughed. "I'll never forget it. I thought the ranch was empty. I had no idea what waited for me inside that cabin. Clay laughed. Mira giggled. "3 strangers waiting for you." Sani smiled. "A beginning none of us expected." Clay looked into the fire, thoughtful. "But I'm glad it happened, every part of it, even the hard parts, because it brought us here, to this moment." The sisters nodded in agreement. Their smiles reflected the warmth of the flames, and the night air carried the scent of pine and distant rain. In that quiet, peaceful moment, Clay understood something important. Life didn't always follow the paths you planned. Sometimes it led you down strange roads, full of uncertainty. But if you stayed open to the lessons, open to the people you met along the way, you might find a life better than the one you imagined. The ranch, the sisters, the work they shared, this was the life he had been looking for all along. A life built not on chance, but on choice. And when the fire finally settled into glowing embers, Clay felt certain of one simple truth. Their journey together was only just beginning.